welcome ASLers. Here we are with scenario S66 from the Advanced Squad Leader Starter Kit number 4, the Japanese version of ASL. And here we have Bailey's Bridge, the next scenario in line. This one has unique terrain, and we will decipher the scenario special rules in order to hopefully play efficiently on this new scenario. So let's get to the scenario card. Let's see what happens. All right, so Bailey's Bridge happens in Matanakau River, Guadalcanal, in September of 42. The Marines planned a three-pronged attack against the Japanese forces on the western bank of the Matanakau River. The 1st Raider Battalion, more Raiders, would cross the river at a small footbridge upstream and attack from the south, while elements of the 5th Marines attacked at the river's mouth. Meanwhile, half of Chesty Puller's 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, would land west of the river to encircle the defenders. Unbeknownst to the Raiders, however, the Japanese had crossed the river at the footbridge and set up on the eastern side. As the Marines surveyed the terrain leading to the bridge, machine gun fire rang out. So you'll see how that's represented in the scenario and the scenario special rules. I think that you'll be pleased with it. Next thing to go to, obviously, very victory conditions, what we have in this particular scenario. So, victory conditions. The Americans win. Again, the Americans must do something in the scenario to win. At game end, which means you're probably going to have to go the distance on this one. If there are greater than or equal to 6 victory points of good order, that's very key, good order American units, including at least 1 leader, west of the river. And we'll have to look at that map. You notice the orientation of N, north is going upwards, and then to the right is obviously going to be east. So east of, or north, south, east, west. Oh yeah. West of the river, and it will make a big distinction. You'll see how it operates on the map. See scenario special rule number 1. We'll take a look at that in a second. Each squad, of course, this is standard ASL. This is standard starter kit. Each squad is 2 victory points. Each half squad is worth 1 victory point. Each -2, and it breaks down all the leaders. Pretty much each leader is worth 1 victory point plus 1 for each negative value it has. So a +1 leader has 0 negative values, so therefore it's worth 1 point. A 0 leader is worth 1 point. A -1 leader is worth 2 points, 1 for being a leader, 1 for having a -1 leadership modifier. And a -2 leader is worth 3 victory points. How much is a -3 leader? 4 victory points. So as you see here, if you happen to have a 9-2 leader, and we'll take a look at the OBs in a second, and a squad and a half squad, that's all you need. That's all you need. Or, like, actually, you can get, if all of them are leaders, it doesn't really matter, because it says 6 victory points worth of good order American units. And so it does not say multi-man counters. Again, another distinction that it's not really plastered in front of your face, but the good order circumstance is what you should be looking at in this victory condition, and I'll tell you why by the end of our scenario analysis. This one's pretty lengthy, to be honest with you, compared to the last one. The last one was 4.5 turns. This one is going to be 6.5 turns. 2 more turns, and to be honest with you, the distance you have to go isn't quite as far, but it still serves to create problems for the Americans. Exact same as the scenario of S55. The Japanese sets up first, and then the Americans move first. So let's head down to the OBs real quick. Again, we could delve into the OBs a little bit better. Again, 11 squads, 7 squads, an array of support weapons, not that big a deal. Again, here's your leadership modifiers. Your 9-2 leader, 8-1 leader, and your 8-0 leader. Okay? So how many points is that all combined? 3, 4, 5, 6. If all your leaders get across the river, you win. At game end, mind you. All your squads can die. If your leaders get across, you win. Again, just general support weapons. We're not really concerned about that. ELRs, etc., they're pretty high. So the setups, the one specific thing you need to read as you're passing through your scenario card, you must take note of your setups appropriately. The Japanese, and this is the first time I read through this one, I missed this. So pay attention to your scenario special rule cards, and everything on the sheet serves a purpose. Japanese, set up east of the river. See scenario special rule number 1. In hexes numbered greater than or equal to 3, which means 3 or more, using hidden initial placement. And you could reference rule 6.4. If in concealment terrain. Well, you'll see the map and you'll say, well, okay. But that does make a distinction because there are a couple hexes that are excluded from that. So HIP in concealment terrain greater than or equal to 3. So what does that mean? What will the Americans see when after the Japanese sets up and the American sits on the table? You say, hey, John, get over here. I'm done setting up. You need to set your Americans up so I can slaughter them. And John sits down and says, what the hell? You haven't done shit. And that's because they're all hip. He won't see a unit on the board. The Americans will come on, not seeing any units. So playing this one here solo is going to be a bit tricky. And this is why squad leader and or starter kit and ASL with hip units and concealed units is fairly problematic in terms of playing solitaire. You have to take some things into consideration. You really have to try and be fair. I tried to do that last game. Try to do the obvious things. You really can't pull a couple things out of your baskets. Maybe just do the obvious things that the American player, a typical player, might do. Sometimes I like to do some wonky stuff, and that's what you have to deal with. And that wonkiness does come into play later on. So scenario special rules, let's take a look at those real quick. To be honest with you, most of these special rules, you've got 2 rules. A lot of players are instantly turned off. They say, oh, Jesus, I got to read another 3 pages of paragraphs of special rules to figure out what the hell's going on. Yeah, a lot of players they do not like bulky special rules. They do not like multitudinous rules as well. A lot of times, if you've got anything more than 4 special rules, it's easy to forget one or skip to the next one or essentially screw them up. For all intents and purposes, screw them up. Here, PTO terrain is in effect, which means what in accordance with jungles, gentlemen? Yes, they are dense jungle. As it was with the last scenario, interior jungle hexes are dense jungle. All other jungle hexes are light jungle. That's fine. We'll get used to that soon enough. The N5, N means the board N. N5 is the hex grid number. BB5 is another hex grid number. Road represents the Matanikau River. There's a footbridge in V6 running from U6 to W7, which means it spans one direction instead of being able to enter the bridge from any direction. So only entrance into V6 can be had from U6 and V7, which it states later on. It has a stacking capacity of 1 squad equivalent and up to 4 leaders, which is really interesting to make sure that it actually sets a different stacking limit for that specific hex. Something to take note of, okay? That you should probably highlight on your card. You could highlight it here. I don't have a highlight. I lied. I actually do have a highlighter. So we've got stacking capacity of 1 squad equivalent. Units may not enter, exit a river hex except for across those hex sides. A unit in V6. Again, this all bottom part of the paragraph from here to here is all pretty much about the bridge. Units in V6, which is the footbridge, are considered to be 1 level lower for movement and height advantage purposes. So, if there's a unit in V6 and people are firing down upon him, there's essentially no effect. For the units in that hex, V6, on the bridge, when they're firing up at other units that are adjacent, those enemy units will benefit from height advantage TEMs, which of course you guys should know is +1. Line of sight rules based upon this new lower level is 2 from V6 is limited to all adjacent hexes and hex R8. And then the last portion just says a path runs through each hex along hex grain N2 to U6. We'll take a look at that, and you'll see that on the map. So pretty much not a lot of units can see units on the bridge physically, but once they come off, it's fair game. So, and then the last one, good order American leaders considered Raider MMC. We had that one before, not a problem. The American M2 60mm mortar, right here, enters play disassembled on its malfunctioned side. You could flip it over, or if you have, just flip it over. And cannot fire until it's assembled in the prep fire phase or defensive fire phase as if it's using a support weapon. So if it's defensive fire phase and there's enemy units moving and you would take a shot at them, you can say, well, first of all, you'd probably want to assemble your support weapon because I guess it wouldn't really matter if you actually cowered. I don't think that would matter. That's an interesting question. If you fired first, cowered, or fired and subsequent misfired, and then you wouldn't be able to assemble the mortar. So take that into account. I think that might be I hadn't thought about this before, because you cannot fire in the prep or defensive fire phase, and it's assembled as if using a support weapon. So all the rules of using a support weapon come into play here, which means if you cower, you probably can't use any other support weapons on the side. So that would be interesting. So mantle at first, in the same breath of you firing or of you attacking a unit, mantle the support weapon in case you want to, and then you could fire your infantry firepower just to ignore problems with that, because that could be something to look forward to. I hadn't thought of that. That's pretty interesting. And while disassembled, the mortar weighs 3 portage points instead of the 5 portage points you guys hate, which, for all intents and purposes, allows you to tote it through terrain normally without loss of movement factors. Once you put that thing together, it's going to be 1 hex in the jungle from then on out, unless you're using the path. So pretty much put it up where you're going to be using it for the rest of the game, for the most part, and plop it down, assemble it, and then let loose the hounds of war. So let's go ahead and take a look at the map. All right, here we are at the map. And let's take a look at how the scenario special rules and the setup area for the Japanese comes into play. So the Japanese has to set up hexes less than or equal to 3. So this would be 3, 3. So let's take a look at the setup areas and the different terrain effects that you see on the map. The Americans enter on N4 and to the east side of the river. North is facing this direction. I don't have my north thing on here, but north is to the left-hand side. East is to the top, and west is going to be on this side of the river. So you need units essentially to cross on this side of the river over here. All right, so the Japanese can set up in hexes 3 or greater than 3, which is right here. And essentially they can set up on this line for the most part by waviness. And then down on this side of the river. So they could set up anywhere within this area that you see here. So, but they can't set up over here. So all the Japanese have to set up, and in concealment terrain. So what hexes would not be considered concealment terrain in the Japanese setup area? How many hexes do you see? 1, 2. That's it. All the other hexes are concealment terrain. So that's what I said. It's kind of silly to kind of take into effect. So what the Americans will see is this when they're coming on the map, when you're playing face-to-face or on Vassal. But what we have to have here is they're going to be visible. And we also have the rule of the interior jungle hexes. You could see a dark green band instead of changing them all to interior like I did on the last game. I wanted to preserve the beauty of the map and keep the forest in the play and just make a ring of, as you see here, hedges. These are just hedges. And so that denotes the line of interior, or not interior, dirt. Let me derp it. Interior and exterior. So obviously these are ones on the inside and outside. And the river, obviously, the blue river here, this is V6. This is considered at one level below only this hex and all adjacent hexes that you can occupy, which essentially are only those 4 hexes because the river is impassable, can see units in V6. But once you jump out, and it's 1 squad equivalent in stacking with 4 leaders. So not a lot of troops are going over simultaneously on that location. And probably not a lot of residual firepower if someone's getting shot either. So not a lot of units can see that, but once they get over there, it's just normal line of sight rules, gentlemen. And the other special rule, N2 to U6, there's simply a path, straight path there. No LOS exists through the path as if it were a road, and therefore it's just simply a means of increasing movement speed. Japanese most likely block those in play. And since it goes through N2 and it says it goes straight, this hex here will be the path exit hex. I will not be able to enter this location, which I have erroneously drawn there, from that hex onto the path and then down the path. It follows straight off the board. It doesn't state that, but I would presume that it would just continue to go straight. So other than that, And the Japanese having all hip units, which means they could be anywhere from N3, N4, pretty much down here, as we saw before. They could actually be up to here, unless I missed something. Japanese could be all jammed up in this area, and you won't have anything to do with. But you'll find them and then jump them in close combat, most likely at the end of the turn. But I had some questions on lines of sight based upon some denoting this as a river. That changes the terrain feature is impassable. A lot of times you can have a line of sight in ASL down the river, etc., etc. But the rules are specific that these are all impassable. No one's going to be in them. And it does not say that the jungle version are missing. It just says the road is converted to the river and not the jungle. So it doesn't say 06 is a river hex. P6 is a river hex because no other terrain exists in a river hex in standard ASL. So this one specifically states that the road is transformed and nothing else. And so another question I had is, what's the TEM of this location, since essentially the TEM is the bridge, right? And there's no bridges in starter kit, but I would presume the TEM for this hex would be considered open ground, as that is what the other location is in this hex. That's a huge assumption, of course, but that's the only thing we can go by in this particular game. Some bridges do have +1 TEM. This one did not state that, but it doesn't state what. It just didn't state that. So the only thing you can go by, roughly in the game, would be the quote other terrain in the hex, even though you're on the bridge. Not a big fan of that. It'd be nice if it said, V6 is considered open ground from all directions, and that would be an easy rule, just to clarify that. So we are going to assume that is going to be open ground with 0 TEM for purposes of this replay. And other than that, what things you might want to think about in this particular game. Again, let me go ahead and swivel this around. For the Americans to come on this direction here, we're talking 7 turns to get across the bridge, and if we just assault move in advance phase and mosey on down the line, we assault move advance phase turn 1, assault move advance phase turn 2, assault move advance phase turn 3, assault move advance phase turn 4. Creeping down the road, assault move advance phase gets you to this location at turn 4. Okay? So something to think about. That you don't need to rush like we did in the last one. You had to bust ass to get to the back. 4 turns, because we have 7 turns, which means 1, 2, 3. That gives us 3 turns to get our 3 leaders across the road. So something to think about. And what's the biggest advantage of assault moving that you'd have for your units coming on in Starter Kit 4? Yeah, most of them will be concealed. If not all of them will be concealed. You'll be moving until you run into a Japanese unit, or a Japanese unit pops up, and then you have line of sight to that Japanese unit by performing any of the actions listed in the Starter Kit 4 rulebook, which you could download from MMP. You then would maintain your concealment throughout the entire time. So if you assault moved here and then advance phased here, and there were a Japanese unit in this location, both of you would be in close combat, in the close combat phase, and both of you would maintain your concealment for determining dice roll modifiers in ambush. So most of that, I think, will come out in the wash, to be honest with you. So that's something to consider. Is if you're Japanese, and let's say you're here, and you've got an American unit. Let's say we assault move here, and let's conceal them. Let's find our concealments here. Give me 1 sec. All right, found the concealments, and I moved closer to the blue Danube. So we come on turn 1. Here's my Raider unit. Remember, Raider units get -1 on their die roll modifier for purposes of ambush. Jungle adds 1 to that modifier, so that they kind of negate one another. But the concealment gives you a -2, as does the Japanese. So if we were to assault move here, and then advance phase here, and because the Japanese is hip, normally I do hip like this or invert them as we did last game, right? We'll invert them because he's hip. And then what happens is at the beginning of next player's turn, say the Japanese player's turn comes and goes, and then we have the 558 here, and we want to advance or assault move into P5. We assault move into P5. We lose our concealment. And unfortunately, so does the 447, because someone attempted to move into your location. So both of you would lose concealment. So what you would do then, as the American player, let's say we had an additional unit back here. Let me clone this. That happened to be concealed. So we lost our concealment. He lost his concealment in the assault move. The second unit then can assault move into this location and just sit there. So the Japanese unit is now exposed. He might as well fire. He's either going to fire on this unit, which moved, and then leave residual there, which would be the smart thing. Because when this unit then enters that location, he'll at least be shot with the free residual firepower marker. Okay, so if we wait, then that unit will not be affected. All right, so starting that example over, just to make sure you understand the concept here of timing of movement. And this is how you kind of dig out the Japanese, at least in this specific example. Assault move, if you had moved in this location here, assault move advance phase. Let's see, he's back here. He's in Q6, right? And then this unit moved assault move advance phase back to coincide with the last turn's movement. And next turn's movement, you could simply move this unit full bore, going 1, 2, 3 to try to bounce into units because you're further inland. You know there's going to be some Japanese units somewhere. So if you go, well, not 1, 2, 3, but 2, 4, you would hit the real unit. He would then be on hip. Both of you would lose your concealment. And therefore, he may take a shot at you. Looking at this situation, what the Japanese player sees is this player in this unit in the back. He's now going to assault move here to maintain his concealment, and then both units together will advance upon him in the close combat phase. So it behooves the Japanese player at this point to fire upon this unit here with 8 firepower, and when that occurs, he will leave 4 residual in that hex regardless of the result. And then when this unit assault moves in there, right, based upon the rules of the scenario, these are still jungle hexes, and then therefore these are interior jungle hexes. This attack will come off at a 4 + 2 because he's assault moving in the hex. Concealment has no effect upon residual firepower. So then you make your dice roll. So a 4 + 2 A 5 will yield a pin task check, which means if that occurs, regardless of the result of the dice roll, this unit would lose his concealment. If the dice roll was 6 or higher, that unit would maintain concealment. Of course, the 447 could subsequent first fire upon these units. Here, I quickly grabbed a first fire marker. This unit could then, he first fired upon the first unit. Now he could subsequent first fire when the other unit makes his move in there as well. Or what he could do, since he assault moved and he's not going to get any benefits for non-assault movement, he can hold his fire into the defensive fire phase. The residual firepower will disappear at the end of the movement phase. And then this unit could fire at 4+2 and try to affect both of the units in the location, which would be a better thought. So then you would subsequent first fire, final fire, in this case the defensive fire phase, and then roll a 4+2, which would potentially affect both units. Let's say nothing happens. Now, ignoring all other aspects of the game, these units then want to engage in close combat with the 447. Right? So the 447 goes up here. These 558s simply advance into the hex. Concealment is not lost when you advance into concealment terrain. And so therefore, we take these units into close combat phase, and then we roll for ambush accordingly. Modifiers we have here, -1 for the Japanese. Yep. We'll just go -1. So we have -1 for the Japanese. And then for the Americans, we have +1 for jungle, -1 for raider, -2 for the concealment. We have no leadership modifiers in there. So therefore, this situation here, you'd have a net, well, the jungle and raider cancels. The -1 essentially cancels one of these. So the allies in this instance would have a net -1 subtracted from their die roll. That's the way I think about it. So the Americans, even though they're advancing into jungle, right, even dense jungle, they still have a -1 advantage on a non-concealed Japanese unit. Okay, so let's take the example, and this is how you need to approach this scenario. You need to, so that's one example that we should happen, just straight up move, and we bounced into somebody. Let's say we didn't bounce into him. Let's say this guy lost his concealment for whatever reason, and then this unit were hidden. And I'm going to put the concealment marker on him just to show that he is concealed, which hidden is a form of concealment, but I inverted the counter to denote that he's hidden. And let's say these units had moved up here using assault movement or normal movement, because if they're using normal movement, this unit is not in line of sight. This is not a known enemy unit, right? This unit's in that hex. He's not a known enemy unit. So when these units say, okay, we're going to advance now, so we're going to advance into Q6. And then after all the American players advances their units, then the Japanese pulls his guy out and says, yep, guess what? I had a dude here. Right? So you don't lose concealment when they advance into your location, which is key, very key. So now, how's that going to differ in close combat? Well, you'll see a significant difference. Sorry about that. Let's take our Japanese unit again, -1 for being first line stealthy. First line, right? First line Japanese are stealthy, so they're considered -1. -2 for being concealed. Okay, boom, boom. So Americans, we have raider, -1 for raider. This is concealed. This is Japanese first. Okay. And then we have concealment as well, -2. And then, of course, we have the terrain itself. Unfortunately, jungle sucks. So, -3, -3. They cancel one another. +1. So the difference in moving into a hex from the last example where we had a -1 net, right? Now we have a +1 net. That's a 2 change on the die roll, which is huge. So roll the die, the Japanese player is a net 1 advantage because the American has to add 1. So if he rolls a 3 and the American rolls a 5 or a 6, the American is going to be considered ambushed. And guess what? Yep, hand-to-hand close combat. So that's going to be bad news. And the Japanese get to go first. So just a slight difference of this unit being either A, concealed or hidden, for that matter, or him not being concealed whatsoever, and then you having a concealed unit moving into his hex. Big difference. If you didn't have the unit concealed, then you simply have -1 for the Japanese, -1 for the Raider, +1 for the jungle, net +1 yet again. So if everybody's unconcealed and they jump in there together, it's the same thing as if both units had at least one concealed unit in there. So because they're both -2, so they both cancel. It doesn't really matter. So same effect. So in getting into close combat is something you may or may not want to do depending on how aggressive you want to be. Again, if you have the negative modifiers, you will have good chances. -1 leaders is what you need to make the ambush die roll even. So, and guess what? You have 1. You have the -2, but you don't want to take him into close combat probably that often because he will be targeted on the squad that he's defending with. So, probably not the guy to start bumping into Japanese units. Maybe, maybe not. But note, the one thing we do have as the Americans are 2 3/8. And typically, half squads are going to be used to bump into units and scout things out so we could find out where the Japanese are. One thing the Americans could do in this sort of situation, let's see, these guys are off the board, and we've got this guy hip right here. I'm just going to invert him to denote that he's hip instead of concealed. And so we just have this unit right here, and we just double time him. So we just go 1, 2, 3, 4, up, bounce. So he'll bounce back. He'll swing around and lose concealment. And then the other units can then move up. No one's going to be able to move up concealed at the first turn at this distance. So that's something you might want to think about in determining your defensive setup as the Japanese. So 1, 2, 3, because if he moves 3, he's not assault moving, and the Japanese unit is known to him, so then he would lose his concealment. What you might want to do, if you suspect a unit like here, if you suspect a unit here, hidden, you could be tricky as the American and go 1, 2, 3, 4. He doesn't lose his concealment. Let's say he's going to be a passive Japanese player because you know your opponent, and he's not going to fire on him. So, and then you have the half squad behind him. He goes 1, 2, 3, 4, double timing, 5. He would then lose his concealment, and then we're in the same situation as we had before, where the Americans have concealment, advancing into close combat, and then you have the advantage in the close combat there. So order of movement for the American player is very, very critical in determining your ambush opportunities later on as you proceed the scenario. Now, do you want to ambush him initially? Maybe not. Maybe you say, okay, I'm not going to ambush. I'm just going to fire to try and whittle him down. And then he'll retreat. And let's say we advance up later on. Some other guy, we lose our concealment. And then we fire on again. And then we whittle him down to not a broken half squad, but a half squad, right? And then we keep moving forward. Let's say we took a half squad casualty. So we lost this guy over here. We move forward even more. And now we say, okay, bop, 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 rat-a-tat-tat. Now we break him. Now he needs to route away from us to one of his leaders or wherever he may be to safety, and then we could advance. Now the Japanese is broken. But, of course, the Japanese leaders, you know, if they're strategically placed, knowing that it takes 2 or 3 times to break these guys down, the Japanese leaders can come back here. If this unit has a DM on him, the Japanese says, Matt, we don't really care about the DM. And the Japanese leader will give this unit an increased morale level. And the unit is in rally terrain. So what would we need to rally this unit? After the very next rally phase where the American unit breaks, that unit, he routes back to the leader, and then he advances to where he just vacated. What do you think we would need to rally that unit? He is no longer the Japanese leader. Makes him DM exempt, essentially. So he would need a 7, 8 for the terrain, for the +1 terrain, and then he'd have a morale level increase simply by being in the same hex as the Japanese leader. So he would need a 9 to rally. You would quite easily rally. You're never going to fail that rally. And then he's up and going. So then he can go up here, get blasted, immediately go back here, immediately be DM'd. The leader will ignore the DM. You need a 9 again. And he's up and going. That's what you're dealing with when you're dealing with these Japanese leaders. Okay? Russian commissars behave very similarly. So when you see Russian commissars in SK scenarios, they're very similar to the Japanese leaders. So the rules are close to the same. So as the Americans, you can either jump them all into close combat because you really don't need a lot of points per se to get across the river. Or you could squeeze your way up there and blast them bit by bit if you can to make a point where you can have a number of units. Maybe a guy with a machine gun. Let's say you're advancing upon the river, right? Let's say this guy just happened to be out in the open. You might have some Japanese units around here, or you might have some Japanese units at this point across the river because you need to be in W7, not in V6. And good order means that if he advances in this location at the last turn with a whole bunch of squads, and you have one unit here and your leader, and you're just barely getting over here, you have to jump into close combat. All he has to do is survive the close combat. These units will not be considered in good order. So you would lose at that instance. So you can't wait the last turn to simply be here and then try and jump on over. Technically you could, if you could blast all these guys to daylights. But as you saw just from the simple example, the 447 takes two failed morale checks to drop down to the 237. And the 237, when broken, rallies fast. So if he rallies fast, he can reoccupy this location. So that's what the Americans are looking towards in this scenario. Again, he's only got a couple mediums and like a mortar. The mortars, obviously. Read your dense jungle. Cannot fire out of dense jungle. Of course, it doesn't matter here because the Americans can never be in a position to be within the range of the mortar. Because the range of the mortar is 3 to 45. So if it were right here, everything's 1 hex. You'd have to be in this location here, or this location here, or some other non-dense jungle location. So you don't really have to worry too much about at least the American mortar firing out of dense jungle. You do with the Japanese mortars, and the reason why are the Japanese mortars They're not here. Yep. The Japanese mortars have a range of 1. So, but you still might not fire out of dense jungle. You may fire out of light jungle into dense jungle, but the airburst would not apply at a range of 1. So, very interesting, very useful mortar. He has lots of smoke, something that the Japanese will hope to take advantage of. If you have the mortars on this side of the bridge or this side of the bridge, and you have a line of American units here, what will you probably do? You will probably drop smoke on these units here, or in front of yourself, or wherever you may be. You could drop white phosphorus. It has white phosphorus, it has smoke, and therefore you can just enshroud him in smoke, or yourself for that matter, and have some extra modifiers for defense. So something to think about. However you want to use the mortars is going to be up to you. Again, scenario special rule says R8 is visible to these locations here. So if you should happen to move a mortar over here, it could fire on every single one of these locations that you have here, where the Americans might be. So something to think about. May not be necessary right there, but that location does have line of sight to our hex here. I think it'll be an interesting scenario. I think it'll be terms of just trying to dig the Japanese out and then trying to make a concerted push across the bridge by stacking up some American units, generating some firepower, some fire bases, and blasting these guys for a couple turns. Again, assault move advance phase gets us here. Gets us here at turn 4. So we've got 3 turns of fire on those units, which all of them are going to be in light jungle. All those are light jungle, and we do have a -2 leader. So something to consider. You can go slow in this one here, and then blast some guys. Obviously, you don't want all the Japanese across the bridge, because then you will probably lose, because you can't blast them all. So something to think about. If you don't encounter anything, you might want to speed it up. This will be the Japanese setup. I just pretty much took a standard defensive setup. You can really play lots of different things with the Japanese setup, and we can go into certain strategy you might want to pull. If you want to pull some cute things out of your hat at the end of the game, you can do that. If you want to avoid units moving around you, you can do that. I'll tell you what I focused on for the Japanese in this particular setup. So let's just zoom down to the Japanese. Spin them around. And take a peek at what they have to look at. Well, looking back, this is the game board edge up here. The Americans will be entering on those 5 hexes, which would be this one, N0 through N4. They'll either be counter-exhausting or assault move, advance phase, what have you. Haven't decided yet. But what I have decided is to try to keep the units here, the Japanese units, out of first turn close combat. Which means if a American unit assault moves, let's just say, for instance, assault moves, advance phase is here. I don't want to set up in that road because he could jump me. And then if he goes 2, 4, and then advance, I don't want to be in that row either. So pretty much I want to stay out of those rows. Now this row is viable, and I may move a couple units up further. And why would that row be viable? Is because if he goes 2, 4, 6 without a leader, and he CXs, and then he advances, we cover the situation what we covered in the strategy. He'll be at a huge disadvantage. CX will be -1. It'll be bad. Most likely I'll fire upon him in P5. I'll lose concealment, but so will he, and he'll have the CX status jumping into me. So I'll have the bonus of that if he wants to engage in close combat. Otherwise, I simply move back in my movement phase, And then he does the same thing. He could assault move, and then I could defensive fire up on him again. The choice would be the Americans at that point. So that's what we have to deal with that. Again, I may move a unit up for there, but here is sort of like a block defense. I set my LMGs on the flanks to give me maximum firepower, 12 firepower in these 3 hexes, 12 firepower in these 3 hexes. And then both these LMGs, I might consider moving an LMG here. So I could have 12 firepower in the center, essentially 12 firepower in any of these 5 hexes, 8 firepower, and these units can combine fire group because they're not in dense jungle. However, dense jungle units and bamboo may not. So these guys have to fire alone. These guys have to fire alone. Right? They could join with this unit, and then therefore, like I said, you can do some decent fire groups. Turn 1, I intend to move. These are my mortars. Both mortars, I'm sending straight across the road. 1, 2, 3, because you're going uphill. Act like it's a -1. 4, 5. And then I may leave the leader there, or I move back. That's most likely I'll leave the leader there. And then they can advance phase right here. Or here. Choice is theirs. The Americans most likely will not get to this location on turn 1, or maybe on turn 2. And in that case, I'll still fire on him with my mortars. A little 1 hindrance. But he won't get to this location on turn 3. So the idea is to move the mortars over here, or even further. Well, this is the only spot he really needs to move to, because then now the mortars can see every single hex. That's going to be +1 terrain effect modifier, at least for direct fire. But it doesn't matter for the mortars because it's going to be a -1. It's going to be a -1 air burst anyway in all of the jungle hexes. I might keep him here, but the problem is if I keep him here, I don't get to fire on S6. So this is a little bit more strenuous position, but I have lots of firepower this squad, and my 9-1 leader, medium, and a squad there that's 8 firepower with 4 more makes it 12. Actually, this won't be doubled. So that'd be 16 firepower at this location. 2 mortars this location. That should decimate everybody. It goes to R6. So that's the idea behind that particular unit. That's the plan for the mortars. I don't want to use them short range because I want to use the smoke. The smoke does 2 things. Increases defense of whatever units that are in there. Plus, it also, again, I could smoke my own units to give them added defense modifications. And then if the Americans should happen to want to cross the river or move through those jungle hexes, at least on the edge that I have smoke in, it'll cost them an extra movement factor. So it'll be 3 and then 5. So they essentially, what it would do is they won't be able to move very fast at this edge of the jungle. They'd still have to maintain their composure within the jungle. Other things you need to look at for the Japanese, you notice and remember that dense jungle has a stacking capacity of 2. So if you have a unit here, let me grab some more units. Let's say you have 2 units here, and you have a unit here, and this unit breaks. I'm not going to flip him because I think you know what DM means. And for whatever reason, there's a Japanese unit over here. Or here. Or there's more American units right there. So we'll just say more American units are right here. Okay? So for him to route, he can't because he would then be overstacking both the dense jungle locations, and then he'd be eliminated for failure to route because he can't go here, here, and he can't enter those locations. In starter kit. In ASL, that unit wouldn't be eliminated for failure to route. So, when the Americans are advancing, they have to make sure to split the units up so units that break can route. Otherwise, it's possible they could be eliminated. So that might actually indicate or dictate an American advance in a solid line, which is kind of anticlimactic for the most part. Failure to route based upon not being able to move into the hex is one of the weaknesses of starter kit, and especially in dense jungle, it really exemplifies or exacerbates that issue of being able to not route in through overstacked units. So something to think about when you're playing the Japanese or the Americans in this one, or any dense jungle scenario for that matter. So we'll just move these units back. So, but pretty much that's the idea for the Japanese defense. Maximize firepower on the flanks. He's not going to really penetrate in the middle. Actually, I don't even need this unit there, because most likely he could only move one hex at a time through the middle. He could either be posted here, or I might take this unit and throw him up in front like we had before, just to throw him off. Or put a unit here and fire point blank at any units firing here and then firing here. He probably won't be able to get to this unit, and I'd get some free shots, and then I could simply move him back 2-4. So that's probably what I'll do. I'll probably put him right there. Or right here. Here he can get to him. He can go 2-4-6 and get around him. Here he really can't. 2-4-6-8, and then he'll be counter exhausted. I'll take the counter exhaustion every single time. So that's the idea. I'll just move him back one. Assault move. I don't want to, well, I could advance into the bamboo, but you'll become counter exhausted when you advance into it. You don't really want to do that, because this is a +2 modifier. For if you counter exhaust that, for all intents and purposes, that will make that +3, turning into a stone building. You really don't want to do that. So I probably will go ahead and put him right here just to take a shot here to put 4 residual firepower down at the location, and then maybe subsequent burst fire over here. So we're gonna go ahead and go with that, and maybe I'll move this unit up here to coincide. I was wondering about a position here, because the Americans can take the unit here, go 2-4-5-6 advance, and then 2-4-6-8 advance, and make his way over here to turn 3 or so, just to have a flanking force. But he'd have to, when he takes a stack of 3 units, he has to stay in the light jungle. So once he penetrates the regular jungle, that'd be one thing. So that might be worthwhile to put a unit here just to deter the flanking. He can't set up in T2 because that's not within the parameters of setup. It has to be 3 or higher. And so that's why this unit would be here. In that case, this unit here might consider moving up to here to have heavy firepower in the front, 12 firepower on all flanks. And that might give me a 24 shot right here. And advancing onto, if you're CX, if you advance onto here, you automatically become CX, which gives me the advantage in close combat. So that's probably what we'll do. And we'll leave it as such. Maybe the LMG can come over here. Or maybe the LMG. Maybe the LMG could be set up with this unit. When he fires here, he could fire 8 firepower here. And then if another unit moves adjacent over here, he could fire the LMG and subsequent burst fire the squad for 8 firepower over here. And leaving 4 residual in both locations. Yeah, we're going to do that. Just to slow him up a little bit. And then we can move back down the road. 2, 4, advance. And then we can have a concealed unit on top of a hidden unit, and then he'll know he's up there. In that case, I might put a unit there just to bait him. That's one thing to think about. Because again, units in dense jungle will not be able to combine fire group or dense jungle bamboo. No fire group possible. This fire group is possible. This fire group is not possible. So yeah, we're going to do this right here. Either this side or this side. I think we should need to protect this flank, so we'll do that side instead. Just in case he moves a leader up. But we need to be closer. that might be the case. Yeah, I'll get free firepower. It might slow them up a little bit down the path. Because I'll get 8 firepower here, and I'll get 8 firepower here. And then subsequent burst fire right here. And again, he can only jump me with 2 units in close combat. So if I should happen to ambush him in close combat, then my close combat die rolls is going to be a 7. So yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to do exactly this. All right. So that is the Japanese defensive setup. And let's go with the Americans to see what the Americans' plan might be from this point. Again, I have to assume I'm having the Japanese face all that direction. Those are going to be hidden units. As they come on board, I'll reorient them to face with the Americans. I'll pose the game from the Americans' point of view, and I'll be sitting essentially on the other side of the table during the Americans' turn. So what we'll do here is that we won't even put the concealments on them yet. Yeah, you might as well. So I'll put the concealment units on them just to show that they're going to be hip, or I might put them upside down to be hidden. So just so we can distinguish that, I'll let you guys know when I do the American side. So let me take a few minutes and let me decide what the American's going to do. All right, here we are from the American perspective. I was contemplating moving the Japanese unit to a different location, but we're just going to go with our first gut. So the Americans have a scout here in the 238, have the 9-2, 5.58, medium machine gun, and another 5.58. Pretty much that's a stack of 2 that's going to advance together. It's a single 5.58. They're simply going to advance down this line here on the side. They're going to advance straight down here. The next units are going to advance this 8-0, 5.58, 5.58, 5.58. Advance here. 238 is probably just going to run down the road, see what happens. And there's 2 5.58s behind him that's going to follow. We've got an 8-1, 3 5.58s right here. These guys are going to hightail it. They haven't decided whether to go 6 or CX to right here. Just in case the enemy might have a bad guy here, he might assault move and advance phase into close combat and kill me. Being CX will kill you. We really don't want to be CX in this game. So I'm going to try and focus on the Americans not being CX'd. So if you are CX'd, it behooves the Japanese to attack you in close combat. First of all, your defense is probably going to be +3 like we stated before, simply due to the fact that dense jungle is in effect. So if he fires upon you, even if it's point blank, and it might be 20 +3, remember, the Japanese step, the 7 is just going to be a 1 morale check. And let's say he fails, so what's it, 336, 347? It's not going to change the Japanese close combat. And his ambush is going to remain the same, and he's still going to jump you in close combat, and he can quite easily get an ambush. If he ambushes you, you're CX, and he's Japanese first line, he gets -3, which means he needs an 8 for a casualty reduction of a 347 against 2 5.48s. You must understand the Japanese ability to eliminate you in close combat, even at 1-4 odds. CX is not going to keep your units alive. So with that being said, the center location here could be very bad for anybody CXing in there. So we may have to avoid this at all costs. All right, so that's our simple American strategy. Push forward. What the concept here is, the medium is here. The mortar is right here on this unit. The mortar is going to move down and try to establish himself an S7 so he could fire upon units that are on the opposite side of the river in this general direction over here. So he's going to clear out the spaces of the defenders on those locations that could be thwarting us. S7 is here. He's going to fire upon this location, and that location as well. So all three of those locations are within line of sight. He's going to pound those locations and then hopefully clear a way to victory. That's the idea. Mortar here, pound there. That's his only option. And we could actually move the mortar up with the 5.58. And when he's up there, he simply drops it off in open ground, and the 238 could pick it up from there. So that's the concept there. Essentially get that mortar right here and start doing some damage. All right. Well, let's get started with turn number 1 for the Americans. So thank you, gentlemen. I think that's going to cover it for the just what you need to look forward to in this one. Pretty much it's a, I don't want to say bug hunt, but you don't necessarily have to find the Japanese. You just need to get across, and depending on how the Japanese want to defend, will determine whether you hit combat early or combat late. He could set up the whole way up here to the whole way, well, back here technically, but he has to set up on this side of the river. So interesting scenario, interesting change of the map. I like how the scenario special rules cut up the map, really makes it essentially a half a board, and down and dirty again. So we'll see how it goes. Thanks for watching, and the game will be coming up soon enough. Thanks a lot, guys.